So yeah, last week I asked Aaron and Sarah what I should talk about. And so they asked me to give a very uplifting, optimistic talk on startup mistakes. And fortunately committed many and seen many more. So here we go. If that thing works. Bottom button?
The right one.
There we go. So briefly about myself, I've been leading finance for angel and VC-backed startups for the last 11 years. Currently CFO at Tungle, StatusNet, which is an open source microblogging platform, and Shopify, a turnkey e-commerce vendor. Also advise a bunch of other businesses very focused on software as a service and freemium. I heard both of those come up with the presenters tonight. Interested in learning more. And also a partner in Real Ventures, which is Canada's newest seed venture fund. We are scheduled to close next month. It'll be a $42 million fund for our first closing tonight. There's some technology startup folks, and then there's some, I guess what I would call normal business folks, owner-managed services companies. So I'm going to try and talk about points that pertain to both. Under the categories of mistakes that you make when you're trying to make money and spend money and finance your business and everything else. Let's talk about making money. So, I think you get off to the wrong foot if you have an unclear offering or positioning in the market. And this is particularly true for, I think, for all businesses, but especially for technology businesses. There are just so many that are coming out every day, and how do you get people to instantly understand your value and how it applies to them? Because if it's not an instantaneous understanding, they'll just move on because we're busy people. So you really have to nail your positioning and who you are and who you serve and what value you bring to them. Otherwise, you're really getting off on the wrong foot. And this is a point, and again, these points right now are kind of for services companies, and I'll delve into ones that are more specific to technology companies afterwards. But something I've seen with services companies, I used to do a lot of advisory work with web agencies. And it was kind of feast or famine. They get a great big contract and then they sit down and start working on it and forget that they have to keep continually bringing in new business. And then suddenly when that contract's coming to an end, they're saying, well, shit, where's my next contract? So you have to be very systematic. It can't be feast or famine. You have to be thinking continually about how you build your pipeline and how you bring in new business. Poor acquisition of mining, and again, this relates to services businesses. There's lots of people out there. The market is probably big for anything you're doing, but you have to be intelligent about how you're going and acquiring those users. Cold calling is a bad idea. If you're a services business, I think the single best source of new business is your existing customers, and that means two things. One is deeply understanding what those customers' needs are so you can do more stuff for them. And second, asking them, after you've done a great job for them, who else you could talk to that you might be able to do great work for them. So really mining, kind of going from one customer to the next, really mining that and being intelligent about how you acquire new customers. Leaving money on the table. I see far too many companies that could have gotten more money from a customer, and that really comes to giving them options. So when you deliver your proposal to them, don't just give them one thing, kind of give them a low and a mid and a high option. And I've found many times that customers will go for the mid option. So don't just go in with one proposal. There we go. And it seems silly, but when you're going through a sales cycle, sometimes it can drag on. It's because you actually haven't asked for the order. So it's a simple little thing, but never be afraid to ask for the business. Not loving your users enough. So if you guys know about Zappos, they're kind of all about culture. It's kind of like the most important thing to them. Tremendously successful business, did $1 billion in revenue, got bought by Amazon. And I've seen too many startups that don't love users enough. And to me, fundamentally, people buy from startups for one of two reasons. Either it's got some crazy ass new shit that you can't get anywhere else, or it's got an unbelievable user experience and support and love that you won't get anywhere else, and ideally both. And after we raised the $5 million round for Tungle, I was the CFO of the company. We had all kinds of cash in the bank, so clearly I had time on my hands. So I started outreaching to every single user who signed up. Every single person got a personal email from me. Hey, this is Mark. Here's Jason who runs support. If you need anything, here we are. And we had a 25% response rate on that. And we uncovered issues immediately, which is super important because there's so much noise out there. If your service or product kind of doesn't work out of the gate, people will abandon you immediately and then you've lost them forever. So that kind of outreach right from the moment they sign up was crucial. And that's just one example of loving your users. FreshBooks every time they're in a different city, have customer dinners, and there's so many ways to slice and dice this, but it's so important. Here we go. So let's talk about spending money. So again, I'm going back to the services or normal type companies in the audience. And there's a key ratio if you're a services business. So if you're a web design firm or a consulting shop, the financial success of your business, I'm getting a bit financially technical here about this, but it really comes down to the ratio between your sales and your people. And in my experience, successful services companies have a ratio of 2 to 1 or higher. And when they are below that, those companies, in every single case that I've seen, have failed. So kind of a basic thing. I mean, clearly you are selling your time or your expertise or your production capabilities, so it's clear that your staff are how you make money. But just watching that ratio is super, super key. Poor project management. Again, this ties to the service example, right? If you're a big web agency and you're not super efficient about how you get specs from the client and do the project and get stuff pumped out, well, all you're doing is you're chewing up salaries, which means you're making the project less and less profitable. Not using variable costs enough, and this again comes back to meeting this key ratio that I talked about of kind of revenue divided by your costs. You should kind of have a core, I think all services companies should have a core internal team and a dedicated outer rim of freelancers or other vendors that they can use to manage those kind of peaks in demand. Hiring too much too soon. So now we're on to tech companies. And this is a bit fuzzy, but I hate that I'm beating on Mobibox, but they're not around anymore. So. And this is a team shot, maybe about 5 months after we raised that $11 million when we were not bringing in a lot of money, and that's kind of a lot of headcount there. And that, by the way, is post-bubble. So if it was pre-bubble, everyone was doing it. So we hired way too many people. This is more of a technical point, again, for technology companies. We're blessed, for better or worse, here in Canada. Scientific research and development credits, SHRED credits, are a super important source of financing, especially out of the gate. And many young startups hesitate on hiring people because they got to pay benefits, employer taxes, it's just super expensive, and so they use subcontractors. And then are surprised when it comes time to file their tax return and do their R&D refund, because if you hire a subcontractor, you only get half of the tax credits that you would have gotten if you'd made someone a full-time hire. So it's important to kind of bite the bullet and have enough cash to hire someone full-time, because you're going to get up to 60 cents of every dollar you spend on that person back in tax credits. Lack of focus. So you maybe heard this term, boiling the ocean, before. Everyone talks about minimal viable product now, so hopefully this is going to become less of a concern over time. But too many startups, I feel, try and do too many things, or we are serving a horizontal market. We're kind of, Tumble is not a scheduling tool for everyone. It's just one example. We really see very specific segments of power users that we go after, from business development people to owners of small businesses to recruiters. We are not trying to boil the ocean and get everyone to be a Tumble user. We're knocking off one segment at a time. So let's talk about financing your business. I guess now that I'm moving to the investment side, I'm the guy in the red. So choosing your co-founder is super important, especially if there's more than one. It's like being married. It's more complex than marriage, and you're being married to multiple people. And you spend all day with them, right? It's like more time than you spend with your actual spouse. So it's like a super important relationship. And related to that is the notion of vesting. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but when you raise money from investors, sometimes they will say, okay, I know you own 30% of the company, but I'm going to make you invest in it, which means over time, over like 3-4 years, you will get to actually earn that thing. Meaning that if you leave the company before that, you don't get to keep your stock. And most founders are like, well, that's crazy. I founded this company. I own that stock. But I encourage anybody who has a co-founder to implement vesting, because in my experience, more of these co-founder relationships break down than succeed. And so you can be halfway into trying to build a company and have some person who owns 20% of it and they're off doing something else, and you're working in part to make that person rich. And I think that really sucks. So implement vesting. And even if you're a single founder, consider doing it the first time you raise even angel capital, because if you're going to go on to raise VC, they're going to ask for it, so you might as well start the clock so you can start earning your shares earlier. Not defining culture and values. Again, I come back to Zappos as a great example. And, listen, when you're like 3 people in like your dining room table, you don't necessarily need to think about culture. But as soon as you get any funding and are starting to bring on team members, I think it's super important to define who you are, what you stand for, what your values are, what kind of people you're looking for, because it's just going to create so much alignment. You're going to get people, you're going to get employees, investors, customers, partners who are aligned with that, and that's when great things can happen. And I think the last point is just forgetting the vision, right? And we start off, and again, in this world of minimum viable product, where I'm out there in the market with something after a few months. It's really important to bear in mind what is the long-term vision and why is it that you started this thing in the first place. Because you're going to be faced with so many opportunities. I could go in this direction, I could do that, this partnership sounds interesting. And if you don't have like a really clear vision to kind of evaluate those opportunities against, you end up going like this. And you end up going super slow and you can get completely off track. And I also think vision is super important for fundraising, because if 2 people come in and have a really basic rudimentary product, an investor may not be super excited about that. But if you can help connect the dots from where they are today to a great big vision, then the investors could be really excited. So that's it. I'm StartupCFO on Twitter and Spreader, and thank you very much.